So now it's the fun part of the show. A good reason why many of you guys might be tuning in and listening. My guest for the show today, he's got many titles. He's got many titles, and for some context, we worked together several months ago on a broadcasting gig. I was calling a basketball game with him, but he goes by many different titles, both a doctor, both a coach, a former collegiate baseball player at San Francisco State for the Gators, the former women's basketball coach for San Francisco State. He's got a master's in business. He's got a doctorate in philosophy from Golden Gate University. He's been an adjunct professor as well, and a former front office exec and employee of the San Francisco Giants player development department. Now he is a current broadcaster for Stanford Athletics and for a bevy of other sports, regional sports networks, the Bay Area Online Sports Network, among others, as well as an analyst for the Santa Cruz Warriors. It's my pleasure to bring on to the show Joaquin Wallace. Coach, doctor, how are you?
I am great. And you know what? I wanted to, because I was listening to your last take. And,
Yeah.
I'm a Sacramento Kings ticket holder. and I bought
Really?
me and my wife. And I tell you what, we're excited. I'm a Warrior fan now, born and raised, but, the tickets are cheaper in Sacramento. I can watch all the
True.
games, right? But I'm going to tell you somebody that you kind of glossed over. Davion Mitchell.
Big fan of his. Big fan of his.
And this guy is legit. I don't know how they're going. I'm sure they're going to figure out. And he fits the Mike Brown mode of defense first, and his offensive skill set has improved over the course of the season as well. When when DeAndre Fox went out, he had a chance to come in and play huge minutes, if you will, and you start to see him growing with the Sabonis, whatnot. Those two are going to be outstanding. And I'm excited to see what they do. I don't know if they're going to be, I think they're going to be able to compete for the play-in game. And that'll be a huge improvement, considering having been in the playoffs for over 20 years. But I think that's going to be a huge improvement for them. And I'm excited to see how this all works out in the number one pick. I was first like, I like Jaden Ivey because I watched him play. I met his mother when I was coaching. She was an assistant coach for Notre Dame. And I remember watching her play for Notre Dame as well and kind of seeing how that happened, progress forward. I was really pulling for him. But after watching Murray, I was like, that may be a big pickup.
And again, I mean, first of all, Davion Mitchell, I've been a big fan of his ever since he's been at Baylor. I just think that his toughness, the way that he defends, the fearlessness that he plays with, almost to a certain degree, like a more defensive-minded, slightly smaller Donovan Mitchell in a way when he entered the league. But I think he's going to pair really well with those guys. And I think Keegan Murray, again, has got a chance to really flourish. He's got a chance to start right away. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Kings do. I'm going to ask you plenty of questions about NBA free agency, Coach. But let me start with something that, again, I think people kind of gloss over is, for you specifically, your background is playing baseball. You're a former collegiate baseball player, and yet obviously you're still around the game, but you've landed so many different gigs with basketball. Let me first ask you, when you first kind of started playing sports, what initially drew you to baseball, setting aside the basketball analysis and coaching jobs that you've landed since then?
That's an interesting question because I was born and raised in Oakland. And in 1972, the Oakland A's, they won 3 consecutive World Series, 72, 73, 74. And so we were all just avid A's fans. And back in those days, you didn't play just one sport. You played all 3. We played baseball during the baseball season. We'll play football during the football season. And then we'll play basketball. And so baseball is something that we just kind of all gravitated towards, when we were coming up. And that continued on as well. Played Babe Ruth baseball We were one of the first teams out of Oakland ever to make it out of the regionals. We played in Hawaii, one game away from the World Series. We did that as well. That was in, I think it's 1980, 79, 80. And you talk about the lineage of baseball players coming out of Oakland. I mean, you talk about Ricky Henderson, Lloyd Mosby, um, Joe Morgan, uh, Frank Robinson, Veda Pinson. I mean, there's so many people came out of Oakland. So we was kind of indoctrinated in playing baseball coming up. And that was the thing to do, just play baseball. As I mentioned earlier, the Oakland A's was like very popular back then. The Giants wasn't. It was all about the Oakland A's winning the World Series 72, 73, 74. They always had a quality team. And so we're in the green and gold. And so that's kind of how I kind of got into baseball, because that's what we did. We just played all sports throughout the season. We didn't play one sport. We played all three.
And obviously now you do still broadcast baseball for Stanford. And again, you've been a former employee with the Giants, but a lot of your gigs include basketball gigs, head coaching gigs, formerly at San Francisco State, and now an analyst for the Santa Cruz Warriors, the G League team of the Golden State Warriors. What kind of drew you to basketball? Obviously, you talked about your origins with baseball, but what was it, despite your baseball background, that led you to want to continue to pursue different types of jobs with basketball?
Well, basketball was something. I was probably a better basketball player than baseball, but I felt at that time I was only 6'1" and a half, 6'2", and felt I wasn't going to be able to make it professionally. So baseball was the best route to go. But I got into basketball because of my oldest daughter. She was playing CYO basketball in the 5th and 6th grade, and I was watching the coach. I was like, man, I know I could do better than this guy can. I've never coached before, and so I started coaching her CYO team in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Did fairly well with that. And then I landed my first high school gig at St. Mary's High School in Berkeley, California. I was a junior varsity coach in the 9th grade. So my first year was 9th grade junior varsity coach. And then the Albany High School job opened up right after that. And then I took that job for 2 years. And then we went from nothing to the playoffs the first year. The second year we went to North Cal Regionals. And then from there, my alma mater, San Francisco State, opened up, and I was my former coach was the athletic director, and so he asked me would I be interested in applying for the job, and I was like, yeah, I was doing AAU with Mark Anger, East Bay Explosion, so I was kind of getting into basketball at that point, and I said, yeah, that's right, I had nothing to lose, right? So I went ahead and applied. He said, well, I have nothing to do with this. You have to go to a panel and everything. I was like, yeah, it's fine. And so I went in. Did the interview. It was a couple of other candidates had much more experience than I did. But one thing that I had was the fact that I was really connected well in the AAU circuit. And San Francisco State was a program that was not that good at the time, and they didn't pay me a lot of money. And so I went ahead and won the gig, so to speak, in our first year. We won 8 games. Wow, it's pretty good. And then my second year, we won 7 games, but with 7 games in league. My first year, we won 8 games, but 3 games in league. So we had an improvement. And then from years 3, 4, and 5, we went to the tournament, if you will. First time we had a tournament, so we won 3 consecutive non-losing seasons. And then I had an opportunity at that point to lead a team to Ukraine, which is Athletes in Action, 2013. And so I was able to take a team over to Ukraine. It's interesting because a lot of it was going on in Kyiv. I seen Kyiv, tour Kyiv. We played the national team over there, which was great. I had 3 consecutive Division I interviews as well from 10, 11, and 12, 11, 12, and 13. So I knew I was on the track for getting an opportunity to coach at the Division I level, but it didn't work out. Wound up leaving and got into broadcasting after that.
And obviously, again, we're going to touch on a lot more kind of current topics with the Warriors and different things of that nature. But I do want to ask you one more question about kind of some of your background and context for right now, because I do think it's interesting that you've got this doctorate in philosophy, and I'm curious for you, Coach, how do you think perhaps having that doctorate in philosophy is either altered or perhaps enhanced the way that you perceive games, that you call them, perhaps the way that you analyze it? Do you feel like having that additional education impacts the way that you watch sports and call and analyze sports?
Yeah, I do. I think that obviously when you have advanced degrees or terminal degrees, you take a different approach, very philosophical. I do a lot of reading, right? And so I would indoctrinate a lot of reading, like incremental growth. Charles Lindblom talks about that. And so just doing things incrementally. And one thing that I always say is, hopefully I can say it correctly here, 'cause I always get it confused, but if you're consistently consistent, your outcome consistently will be consistent. And so, what I always try to do is try to be consistent, reading, educating, teaching, because the biggest thing about coaching is teaching. And if you're a good teacher, then you're able to translate your thoughts to the particular player and be able to articulate in a manner that they can understand. And if you look at the best coaches, one thing that you notice was synonymous, that they are excellent teachers. And if you're a great teacher, then you're able again to provide information to them that they can articulate, they can regurgitate, and go out and perform. Most coaches they're good tacticians, but they're really not good teachers. But if you look at the winning coaches, winning programs, whether it's in baseball, football, basketball, soccer, whatever the case may be, one of the constant, their DNA that they do have is the ability to teach. And having my doctorate, learning how to read, research, and things of that nature, being patient, if you will, it allowed me to teach and articulate in a manner that most coaches just was not able to do that.
I gotta tell you that the adage you used about consistency is a real tongue twister, Coach. It might take me a couple times to try and deliver that, but I do think, because I do think it's interesting the way that you can kind of perceive sports with that additional education and background is something that's obviously extremely noteworthy. So let's focus on what's been most current. And I know you and I were talking a little bit in preparation for this about the NBA free agency. You heard some of my takes about which teams I thought have excelled so far this offseason. A big surprise for me, and obviously my take on the Sacramento Kings in their offseason. But in your mind, what were some of the, when you looked at some of the notable trades, and or at least requests for trades in the case of Kevin Durant, but whether it's Gobert, whether it's DeJounte Murray and the Atlanta Hawks, what were substantial trades in your mind that you think will pay off big time come next fall?
Although Marcus Smart was not a happy camper by getting Malcolm Brogdon, I think that he is going to be a linchpin for them to move to the next level. And I do believe, because people forget he was the rookie of the year as well. I mean, he's solid, as you mentioned. He's solid, got nice height. He can create his own shot. He can get you a shot as well. He can play defense. He's a leader on the court, and he doesn't have a lot of flash. But one thing he's effective. And I really do believe by adding him to the mix, whether they're going to start him or what I imagine they will start him and Smart will play at the same time. But although Marcus Smart doesn't believe that they need a point guard, that he was able to take them to the finals, which he did. But at the end of the day, though, his shooting was streaky. I'm speaking of Smart. He has the ability to knock down some shots, but it's not consistent. And I'm going to go back to when the Warriors played their first game. And the Celtics had, I believe, 20, maybe plus 20 in terms of threes, I do believe. And it was Smart, the center, his name escapes me right now, in Harris, the point guard, White, the point guard, the center, his name escapes me, and Smart. And
Perhaps Al Horford or Robert Williams.
and so one thing that Draymond said, and he went down the stat line. He mentioned the three guys. He said, well, I mean, they had 27 threes, but look who hit them. And so it was one of those, yeah, okay, it was one of those kind of abnormal things that happened in a game, probably in a series, but for the most part, it wasn't consistent. And you started to see that as the games progressed forward, because Marcus Smart, you watch a lot of tape on guys, you see what they like to do, and he wasn't consistent with his 3-point shooting. Braun is a consistent scorer, and they're going to give him the ability now to keep the ball in his hands. And so what happens? Well, Tatum doesn't have to have the ball in his hands. Brown doesn't have to have the ball in his hands, and he can space the floor as well, and he can get to the rim and create shots. I think that was a big pickup. I love Murray for Atlanta simply because here's a guy that's 6'5", can defend, he can score it. And as you've seen, when Trae Young was getting double teamed by the Heat, there was no offense for Atlanta. You can't do that with Murray on the floor because he can take you off the bounce as well. He has enough length to get to the rim, and you're not going to be able to bother his shot. I feel those two pickups was huge, but I like Herter too. I mean, this guy here, people are sleeping on Herter. This guy can put the ball on the floor. He can shoot from distance, and he can play the mid-range game. He's a three-level scorer. And that's the difference between him. You look at him as a guy that's a catch and shoot. You know, he's a legit three-level scorer. Get to the rim, create a mid-range game, as well as play from behind the arc. So he's going to make Sacramento a lot better as well in terms of floor spacing. If you bring him off the bench, that's instant offense. However you want to have him, he's going to be huge. But let's go back to the one that you mentioned that I am not in agreement as well too. The Rudy Gobert. You know, that I don't understand that pickup simply because, yeah, he's the defensive player a couple of years ago. Right. We know that. Great rim protector. But he's been exposed every year in the playoffs because you go small. He cannot go out and guard beyond 10 feet. And he's a liability offensively as well, too. He only really scores around the rim and on putbacks, if you will. You can't really run no offense for him. So that's going to force Towns to play out, right? Which is great. That's what he wants to play anyway. So Towns wants to play away from the rim. He has reached the pinnacle, right? Now he has what he wants. But at the same time, they're going to be a defensive liability, especially late in games because teams are going to go small and they're going to expose them as they did with Utah in the past 2 seasons.
I think the other part of it for me with the Utah Gobert trade, and again, I do understand to some degree Minnesota wanting to make some move. I do admire the boldness and the kind of intrepid attitude that the new owner and the new front office are taking. I just look at their core and I say to myself, okay, do I want my core 3 guys, the guys that are basically going at some point to be taking up about $120 million of my cap space, to be Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, and Rudy Gobert? I just don't know if it's daunting enough to the point where all 3 of those guys are versatile, both on offense and on defense, to the point where it's really going to intimidate opponents. I don't know if Rudy Gobert, I think part of the reason why, Coach, a lot of people are ridiculing this move is because, as you mentioned, Rudy Gobert doesn't necessarily provide you much offensively. If you were paying him simply $25 million to be the defensive anchor, I don't think anyone's going to be double guessing or giving a double take to this move. But the fact that he's getting paid $47 million, and on top of that, as you mentioned, the fit with Karl Anthony Towns, I know he likes to operate from the perimeter, but this is a guy that came into college not as much of a shooter, had great post moves at Kentucky, and now he kind of shies away from that. And I don't think that Rudy Gobert playing in the middle of the paint is necessarily going to help that aspect of Karl Anthony Towns' game. I'm just not sure if I'd like those 3 guys to make up the core of my team for the next 4 or 5 years.
I agree with that. But also we have to look at too is that we don't know what the management of Minnesota's thinking. But one thing that you do know is that in the playoffs, it's coming down to seeding. Where are we at in the playoffs? So in their mind, they're possibly saying, listen, if we get these guys together, we can improve our seeding. If we improve our seeding, we have a better control of who we're going to play, so to speak. If we're a higher seed, that bodes well for us, right? Because you don't want to come in as a lower seed. So maybe now they're thinking, yeah, if we can improve 8, 10 games, right? Because that's a big improvement in the West. It's going to be pretty much it's going to be conjected all the way through, right? It's going to be a lot of traffic in there. So if we can improve our seeding can possibly help too. They're going to win a lot of games simply because there's not a lot of teams that's going to be able to match up with them. But what it's going to come down to is when you get to the playoffs, right? It's kind of like when you think about baseball. In baseball, when you look at the old A's in 2002, 2003, A's had Hudson, Zito, Boulder. I mean, these guys was great pitchers. They were able to play well. But one thing that people don't realize in baseball, when you get to the playoffs, you're facing number two pitchers.
Right.
So your run scoring is going to go down. Same thing in basketball, right? When you get to the playoffs, now you're not playing the teams that aren't that good, right? So you're not going to win a lot of games, but you're hoping to, in terms of schedule wise, you're hoping to win all those games you're supposed to win. We're supposed to win these games, right? We may win these games, but we're supposed to win these games. There's more games that you're supposed to win. And if you can win those games, it's going to help you in terms of your positioning. And I'm sure that's what they're thinking as well, too. And maybe we can get a 4 seed, possibly. You never know. Or even a 5 seed.
It would be ironic to me if, as you said, they win a bunch of regular season games, they elevate their franchise to a top 4 seed, and then come the postseason, they're like, hey, you know what, Rudy? Appreciate what you did for us in the regular season. Doesn't look as serviceable in the postseason, and they bench him if he helps you kind of get to a top 4 seed. That would just be the unfortunate reality for him if that was to be the case.
And
But
and John, that may happen. You never know.
right,
But look at this from perspective, though. If the Timberwolves can some kind of way finish in a number 4 seed or 5, that's a huge improvement. So from the money aspect, you say, see, it was worth it. We were, I don't know what they were, like 7 or
right.
8.
Well, it means they've done something right for
Yeah,
sure.
we're continually moving the needle. So we're improving our position. We're improving our position. So from a fan perspective, you say, hey, you know what? We was here. Now we're number 4 or 5. We're moving in the right direction. Then hopefully next year they can get a little bit better. Next year get a little better, right? Because what it comes down to is how well are you playing in the playoffs and how deep are you going, right? What are you doing? Fans wants to see improvement. That's why they call them fanatics, right? Fans, fanatics for a reason, right? So they want to see improvement, and that's exactly they will win more games this year than they did last year.
So let's look at the Warriors and their championship run, because obviously you've been following this team and you've closely been with, granted, the G League team, but you've been around the organization for several years. And obviously they just won the title again. They're fourth in the last 8 years. And from your perspective, what do you think was the biggest change in that series come after game 3? Because something kind of switched and all of a sudden they rattled off 3 straight games. What do you think changed in that series that helped propel the Warriors to win that title?
Well, a couple of things. One is the fact of the matter that the Celtics had a chance to close the Warriors out in game 4. And after that game, I remember talking to a couple of my friends about that game. Upon conclusion of that game, you seen that the Celtics' shoulders were slumped. They lost their confidence because they knew that was their opportunity and they let it slip away. On the other hand, the Warriors knew that they was going to win the series at that point, because you can look at your opponent and say, you know what, we got them now. Because that was a game that they felt that they should have won. We're speaking of the Celtics, and let it slip away. Now you're talking about experience and you're talking about depth. So you have experience and you have depth. And we talked about Marcus Smart and the White, their inability to make shots. And so now you have a team of the Warriors that have a lot of confidence. They're coming back to Chase Center, where they had not lost a playoff game outside of the game 1, right? Because they were doing pretty well. And that was, you expected the Celtics to win game 1. So they came back home, felt good about themselves, and they knew that the Celtics were reeling at that point. They were tired in terms of fatigue because now they have to play that type of intensity for 7 games. And I always felt in the playoffs this year in particular that there would be no team that could beat the Warriors 4 games. And although they were down 2-1, the Celtics had their chance, but they didn't take advantage of it. At that point, it was a wrap, and the Warriors knew that they could win those 3 games.
And if we take a closer look at the Warriors, specifically with a player like Jordan Poole, now I know Gary Payton, you could probably talk about a similar or recall a similar story with him, but I want to focus on Jordan Poole for a second, Coach, because you saw him play in the G League. You saw when he arrived to the team, you've seen how he developed and the maturity that he's shown over the last couple of years to have to be all of a sudden thrust into a lineup when Klay Thompson goes down and see his minutes rise and kind of assert himself and really blossom into this new player. What did you see from him when he originally arrived with the Warriors in their G League program? And how have you seen him continue to develop and mature his game?
Well, when you look at it, when he came up originally as a rookie, I mean, you had a healthy Klay Thompson, right? I mean, you had an opportunity for him to learn. And it was difficult for him to do that because Jordan Poole had the ball in his hands. And often people forget the fact of the matter is that the Warriors' offense is a man movement, ball movement offense where you get a lot of shots off the ball. But you're taking a person like Jordan Poole at Michigan who had the ball in his hands, creating his own shots, getting to the rim. He was option number one. But now you're asked to come in and become part of a group of a team, a man movement offense. And he struggled with that. I mean, because he wants to get his shot off and not understanding that your shot may not come on the first pass, it's going to come on the second pass, or it may come off the third pass, so to speak. And and Draymond Green pretty much had the ball in his hands. He was dictating the offense. And so he had to learn to deal and learn how to adapt to that. So when he came down to the G League, he had a chance to play free, had a chance to understand the offense and become better and understand the work that was required to play at that level and the level of fitness. And that's one thing that people don't understand. To play in a man movement offense like the Warriors have, a Princeton style, Pete Carroll type of offense, you have to have a high level of fitness because you're constantly moving throughout the game. You're not standing. It's not like most offenses, 1-4 type of situation where guy sits out in the corner, stretched out for threes. They're constantly moving. Where Klay Thompson's moving, obviously Steph is moving consistently throughout the game, and Draymond has the ball, and so he had to learn how to play within that. So when he played in the G League, and then the next year playing in the bubble, now he has a chance to really play because both Steph and Klay is out, so he's just playing basketball at that point. Him and Andrew Wiggins, they're out there playing. If you were Draymond playing when he when he want to play, so to speak, and so now he had a chance to kind of learn the offense, learn the movement, learn the sets because it's a free flowing Princeton style offense. But once he was able to do that, now he comes back. Klay is still hurt. He had to play. He got to play the first half of the season, I do believe, up until January as the starting two guard. Starting two guard behind or next to Steph. Now he had really a chance to play at the next level. You can see he just grew in terms of his growth, if you will, and understanding the flow of the game and the fitness level. And I'm sure he talks about it as well. The level of fitness that you have to be in to play in that offense. And I'm sure you've seen the interview with Edwards said when he worked out for the Warriors and how they put him through a Steph Curry workout and he thought he was working hard. And Steve Kerr asked him, can you work harder? Because there's a lot of movement within an offense itself.
That was a great quote. I loved that quote from Edwards and Steve Kerr, because you're right. You have to be not only an extremely unselfish type of player, but just a mindset when you're playing for the Warriors, understanding you're probably not going to touch the ball very often. You're going to have to be moving around, and that's why I'm curious to see how guys like Kuminga and Moses Moody kind of fill in and step up now that Gary Payton is gone, now that Otto Porter is gone. But I think the perspective you're talking about as far as the conditioning and playing without the basketball is something that, listen, clearly it starts from the top down, and you see that even on the Warriors team and then the Santa Cruz Warriors, you got to play like that. So to get those minutes, that's obviously the mindset you have to approach the game with. So I want to transition, Coach, to to Stanford, and obviously the Pac-12 and the big news that's been reverberating throughout sports the last couple of days and over the weekend, which is UCLA and USC moving away from the Pac-12, basically defecting for the Big Ten, come as soon as perhaps next year. In your mind, and again, you broadcast a lot of sports for Stanford. You've been a part of the Pac-12 for years, growing up in the Bay Area. How much do you think this move impacts Stanford and their athletics moving forward?
Well, first and foremost, it's a shock, right? When you think about the Pac-12, the Pac-10, the Pac-8, right? You always considered USC and UCLA. I mean, that was like the staple of the Pac-8, 10, and 12. And so for them to leave, as you mean, defect over to the Big Ten, it's going to have a lasting impact on the conference itself. And you see now that the Pac-12 is scrambling, trying to figure out what they want to do. Are they going to merge with the Big 12? There's a lot of chatter that is out there. In regards to Stanford, how they may wind up, and it was a rumor, I don't know, it's something that's written that the Big Ten is considering Stanford with the Fighting Irish and using that as a rivalry because Stanford and Notre Dame play a lot of football. So if Notre Dame does go over to the Big Ten because of the money, they're trying to position Stanford as an opportunity for them to come in and continue that rivalry between the two. Now, having said that, we don't know what that looks like. But for Stanford, I mean, they're one of the only schools in terms of the broadcasting. They broadcast every sport. So we're very fortunate that we broadcast water polo, soccer, tennis, baseball, softball. I mean, you name it, we're working consistently. So we have an ability to reach our the parents of the fans who follow Stanford Athletics. But how would that affect? We'll see. Without USC and UCLA, definitely it's going to make an impact, especially on the large revenue sports, which is football. Basically, that's what it comes down to. But for Stanford, let's go back to UCLA and USC. Football, obviously, the money revenue with that. But in regards to like water polo, and that's a sport that's kind of like an under sport. People who don't understand water polo. In terms of water polo, it's ran out of the MPSF, which is not the Pac-12. So you have USC, you have Stanford, you have California, you have UCLA, Stanford, California. Who am I missing?
For water polo, is what you're saying?
For USC, yeah, UCLA, Stanford, California. So those are the four, right?
Oh, yes.
Those four have consistently won the water polo championship, both men and women. Right. So in terms of that, they will always be in sport. They will always compete because they're outside the Pac-12. Now, we're talking about baseball, possibly that can hurt as well. In terms of USC, hasn't been as dominant as years past, but UCLA has been up there in terms of baseball. A couple years ago, they was number one seed and they got knocked out. So they've been pretty prevalent in the revenue sports. We're talking about the highly, I guess, visualized sports, so to speak. But I think it's going to just impact them in terms of finance, in terms of money. Because, I mean, you look at it, the USC and UCLA, I mean, they are a brand in itself in terms of football. I would say behind that, Oregon, right? So you look at Oregon as the next one behind. They're talking about what Oregon and Washington are going to do. So we'll see how it's going to affect the Pac-12 itself. It may not be no more Pac-12. You never know. And I understand that the Pac-12 is trying to work out a new TV deal. That's the thing that they're speaking about right now with the 10 teams that they have in there. But I know they're looking for other teams as well. So we'll see how this all plays out.
And I've been hearing that they are in talks about a potential loose partnership with the ACC, although who really knows? It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what unravels. But obviously, this was huge. You're also talking about the second largest media market in the United States. That's obviously a pro for the Big Ten, but a major loss for the Pac-12. All right, final kind of topic, Coach. For the MLB, I want to ask you briefly I know you weren't with the Giants too long. I believe 1987, if I
Yeah,
did my homework correctly.
1987.
Uh, Now, obviously, the Giants have had a lot more success in recent years. Obviously, in the 2010 decade, they won 3 World Series, didn't quite attain the same levels of success when you were there. But what do you kind of remember about your time with the Giants? Do you have any entertaining stories from when you were with that organization?
Yeah, I got a ton of 'em. But so in 1997, obviously, I was the first African American ever to work in the front office of the San Francisco Giants, right? It came right out from the heels of Al Campana. So I'm going to tell you the story on how it worked, and then I'm going to tell you the story in itself. So one day, this is when baseball was on NBC with Joe Garagiola and Tony Kubiak. And so one day I'm sitting, so I just got through playing baseball at San Francisco State. So I'm watching the Saturday game, and you have Joe Garagiola and, like I said, the Kubiak. So I'm watching the game, like everybody, I'm watching the game, and they're interviewing Al Rosen. They're just talking baseball. And I'm just watching the game, really didn't make anything of it. A few days later, I get a call saying, "Hey, from the Giants, saying we'd like to interview you for a position." I didn't know what the job was. I was still thinking I was going to play professional baseball. I was like, "Why am I going out?" So I go out to the job interview in pretty much some jeans and a shirt, thinking it was a concessions type of interview, right? Working the concession stands. So I go in an interview, and it was Al Rosen, Ralph Nelson, and Carlos Alfonso. So Al Rosen obviously was the general manager of the Giants at the time, and Ralph Nelson was assistant general manager, and Carlos Alfonso was the development. He was the director of scouting development. So we're talking. I was a shock first. I was like, okay, wow, am I there? And I was saying to myself, I just seen this guy on TV, right? And so they're asking me questions about players and what do you think of their career and things of that nature. It's like, yeah, I want to still play baseball. It looks like you still play, right? And say, okay, we'll get back to you after the All Star game. All Star game happens. They call me back out, but this time I went out in a shirt and tie. I was like, okay, this is a little bit serious. So I go up to the shirt and tie, and they talking to me. So I met a guy named Nahabedian. Dave Nahabedian. He was my boss at the time. So they introduced me, everybody, the brass, they call it, if you will. So and ultimately, I get the job. So long story short, I get the job. So my job was to every day I would reach out and speak to Roger Craig, the manager. I'll go down to his office, Roger Craig, so to speak, talk to him, give him all the updates of all the minor league teams from Phoenix to I had a team in Hawaii at the time, Madison, Shreveport, all the teams. So I would input all the information, and he would ask me, "So what about this guy here? What about this guy here? What about this guy here?" I'll tell him about these particular players. Will Clark be there? Who else was on there? Chili Davis, Hack Leonard, Jose Uribe, all these guys. So I'll be in the locker room a lot. And when I'll meet with him behind closed doors and give them information, they say, never get close to the players because they always want information. So I would, in this particular time, one story in particular, I'm in my office, inputting my information. Ralph Nelson calls me on the phone, says, "Hey, I need you to come up to the suite." Because every game you go up to the suite and watch games. I said, "Well, I'm putting this information because we had to get ready for our meeting in Dallas for the after the season. We had the meetings, if you will. So I'm putting all the information in." He said, "No, I need you to come up right now. Right now, I need you to come up." I'm like, "Okay, all right." So I hang up the phone, and I go upstairs, and it's Willie Mays, right? And so I go upstairs, and Willie Mays says, "Hey, I always wanted to meet you. I heard a lot about you." And he shook my hand, man. And his hand was like two of mine. It was just engulfed my hand. And I was just like, "Oh my God, this is Willie Mays," right? And I'm sitting like a kid. But they say you never supposed to act like you've been there before, right? So I'm sitting there like, "Oh my God, it's Willie Mays." And so I'm trying to leave. And he said, "What are you on?" I said, "Sit down over there." And I'm like, "Oh my God, Willie Mays, sit down," right? So I'm sitting down talking to him, talking baseball. He said, "What you drinking?" It's like, I don't know. And he said, "Well, yeah, take that Heineken over there." And like I said, his hands are huge. Picked it over, gave me the Heineken, right? And so we watched literally like 7 innings of baseball. I mean, he just talking baseball, and I'm just like, wow, this is really nice, man. And we just sitting there and talking, and he wanted to get to know me about my career, if you will. It was a great memory. But we didn't take pictures. We didn't have we didn't have like iPhones and things of that nature. So I didn't get a chance to take pictures with him. But I met Willie Mays, Tommy Lasorda. I'll be on the field all the time. Tracy Jones, who played for the Reds, Eric the Red. I remember I had a chance of meeting him. Kenny Landreau, Willie Stargell, and at the time there was only 7 African Americans in the front office position, and I was one of the few. Me, I think Ron, Bill White at the time, Hank Aaron, there's a couple other ones. So it was 7 total, and I was like the youngest out of all of them. So it was a great opportunity. Learned a lot, and memories I'll never forget.
That's awesome. I can totally imagine just Willie Mays walks up and you're trying to keep your cool, but it's Willie Mays, so that's hard to do. Coach, finally, let me ask you, where can people follow you? Where can people listen to you, whether it's with Stanford or with the Santa Cruz Warriors or anything that you're doing? Where can people check your stuff out?
Well, yeah, I have a Twitter page at Joaquin Media, at underscore Joaquin Media. That's my Twitter page. And same thing with my Instagram at Joaquin Media as well. You can go there, follow me. I do a lot of voiceover work as well. So a lot of people say, "You do voiceover?" Yeah, I do voiceover work. But I do a lot of voiceover work, kind of fell into that. And, just out there, just trying to live the dream, right? As they say, live the dream and see what happens next year. I know we get back into Stanford, do a lot of games there and pick up some stuff. With USF, I do some as well, too. So I guess my portfolio is growing. And I'm looking forward to next year. Hopefully, we can do some more games together. And hopefully, it's not the last time. I'll be on your show. This is great. Hopefully, you guys bring me back again. But it was fun, man. And you're doing a great job.
Thank you so much. No, listen, it's fun for me. Appreciate you taking. I took a lot of your time this morning, but it's always fun to catch up. And yes, I'll definitely have you back and enjoy the rest of your summer. Looking forward to listening to you and hopefully working with you again in the fall. Thanks, Joaquin. Appreciate you coming on.
Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
All right.